off air. Now you're live.
Hello, Kent. This is Kent Hovind in Lenox, Alabama, and I have with me by Skype Stefan. Is it Frello, I guess, from Denmark, and wants to have a debate on the topic of creation versus evolution. So we're doing this live on our YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official. Tell your friends to join us. Stefan, we've tried to get this debate for quite a while, and I appreciate your patience on this, trying to get all the technical stuff worked out. I asked if you would go first. You said the topic of the debate would be about homology, similar structures. Does that prove evolution? I'd like you to tell a little bit about yourself, what you believe, and if you could start off and give your evidence of why you think this homology is evidence for evolution. So go ahead, Stefan.
Okay. I'm a molecular biologist and a mathematics. I have a PhD in botany from the University of Copenhagen. And I have worked as a scientist for about 10 years, but now I'm a teacher in mathematics at the level just under the university. I have I just opened this slide thing, PowerPoint I have made. I hope that's on the screen now.
Yes, sir, I see it.
Okay. We agreed on the topic of patterns of homology or non-homologous anatomical and genetical structures, whether that can be thought of as evidence of evolution, and that's what I'm going to argue that it is. First, I hope we can agree on the definition of terms that evolution means the descent of modification through natural selection, working on random mutations, and this can result in accumulation of genetic and anatomical complexity. At least that's the claim that it can, and the result of this is that all living organisms are related through common ancestry. And in opposition to that, creation is the sudden miraculous appearance of different kinds of living organisms. And they can experience some change, but only within certain limits. And therefore, different kinds are unrelated. I hope that we can more or less agree on those definitions. Otherwise, we will have to discuss that too. Okay. How could we identify whether what we see is design or evolution? At least in human design, what is easy to observe is that the same kind of units are used in very different devices, such as the same kind of batteries in this example. But under evolution, you would never see exactly the same complex structures in very different organisms. You will always be able to identify a gene or a protein exactly to what organism it comes from. So that's a very profound difference between human design and evolutionary design, if we should call it that. Just to make sure that everybody understands what we are talking about, very, very basic genetics. DNA is our chromosomes and the basic information of what makes every single organism like it is. This is through a process called transcription. Is a molecule called messenger RNA produced, and this is used for translating into protein. And the protein is mostly where the function is, and also a lot of structure is defined by proteins. So in this way, a sequence of DNA is transferred into a sequence of amino acids, which defines a protein. So this is how it works. One thing that is very easily detected in high organisms is the mitochondria. It has its own genome, and part of my arguments will be based on the mitochondrial genome and the homology and lack of homology in the mitochondrial genome. As it says here, there are a number of proteins in the mitochondrial genome, but only very few. Only actually in animals about 13 protein coding genes, and a number of other genes. Other organism has various number of genes in their mitochondria, but all higher organisms, all multicellular organisms, and a large number of single cellular organisms has a mitochondrion. If you sequence the DNA of the mitochondrion from various animals and compare them, this pattern could emerge if you start with the wolf and compare it with various more or less related species. If you compare it with its well, the same, not only the same genes, but some will say the same species, the domesticated dog. It's a little, depends on who you ask whether the domesticated dog is a specific species or the same species as the wolf. But it has a very high homology with the wolf, 99% homology in the mitochondrial genome. If you compare it with another species in the same family, for instance here the fox, you get much lower homology, 85% in this case. If you compare it with species within the same order of mammal, the carnivores, in this case the domesticated cat, you get still lower homology, and so on through placentals and on to marsupials and monotremes. And if you compare it to another class of vertebrates, here I have used a chicken, a bird, you get still lower homology. This is exactly what you would expect from evolution. Exactly. That within very closely related organisms, you should expect very high homology in the genes, and you should expect lower and lower homology when you compare species that has a common ancestry that is further and further back in time. And therefore, all mammals should share more homology between them than to any animal that is not a mammal. And all carnivores should have a higher homology between them than any mammal that is not a carnivore, and so on and so forth. And this is what you see all over the place. It doesn't matter if you start with the wolf, or you start with the domestic cat, or you start with the blue whale, or you start with humans. You see exactly the same pattern. And I look forward to see your response to this. How can this be explained within a creationist pattern or a creationist worldview? Actually, this phenomenon of the homology has been researched very thoroughly by Nathaniel Jensen, who is with the Answers in Genus in Research. Journal has published this picture and a number of other pictures like it. It is showing the homology of the mitochondrial genome between a lot of different animals. You have to imagine all the animals going up the yellow axis and along the up the vertical axis and along the horizontal axis, and along the diagonal. Well, my English is not good enough for this. The slope going from the upper left to the lower right corner, you have comparing this one animal with itself, and the rectangular areas are closely related species. It has been highlighted where the mammals are. I hope that you can see it. It is in the lower right corner of the great red triangle, and the red squares are indicating high homology, and the blue areas are indicating low homology. So the red square in the lower lower right corner is showing that all mammals has higher homology with each other than with any other animal, just as you would expect. And this is made by creationists. So it is not. It is you can trust it if you trust creationist scientists. He made this kind of investigation in all the different mitochondrial proteins and found exactly the same pattern in all of them. A very, very strong indication of relationship. Of course, he interpreted in another way, but that's a different story. Also, you can make another kind of test of this homology. If you compare the domesticated dog again with the wolf, the mitochondrial genome again, you find that they are identical except for about 170 positions. But within the fox or the dog family, you have a lot of differences. The greatest difference I found was between a species called the grey fox and one called the doe, and they had about 2,400 different positions, which means that there are about 15 times more variation within the dog family than there are between the domesticated dog and the wolf. And I don't think there's any disagreement that the domesticated wolf has, or the domesticated dog has been together with people for at least 2,000 years, and most people will agree that it is much longer than that. So, if the accumulation of differences in the dog has been more or less the same as in the rest of the family, then it is impossible to explain how the maximum differences can be 15 times higher than between the wolf and the dog, because that would take at least 30,000 years. It would be impossible to explain within a very short time frame of about 4,000 to 5,000 years. So I'm looking forward to your comment on that too. Another kind of homology is, of course, anatomical homology. Here are a number of examples of anatomical homology and non-homology, more or less. All the three to the right, the whale and the human arm and the dog wing, all are more or less the same structure. You see we have one arm bone and then two bones and then a number of small bones and then the fingers, and that's the same in all three. The shark skeleton is completely different, and you could say that, well, the three to the right is looks the same, or looks more or less the same, because they have the same creator, but the shark should have the same creator too. So why do the whale flipper look more like a human arm than like a shark fin from a creationist point of view? From an evolution point of view, it's exactly what you would expect, because the whale and the human has a common ancestor that is much closer to us than the common ancestor we have with the shark. So I look forward to your comments on that too. Other homologous structures, the famous example of the vertebrate eye, very complicated thing. The eye in the middle is the eye of a squid, an octopus, and they look very much the same. But if you look at the details, you can see that the dark green area, which is the nerve cells, in the vertebrate eye, they are on top of the retina, the light detecting cells, which is in the opposite direction in the eye of the squids. There the nerve cells are below the retina. So this this difference between the structure of the eye of vertebrate and the squid is a mollusk, and all eyes in mollusks, they look quite different, but they all have this structure that the nerve cells are beneath the light detecting cells. Of course, the eye of an insect looks completely different. But why? Why is there this difference? That's and why does it follow exactly the larger taxonomical groups? Why are all vertebrate eyes identical in this respect, and why are all mollusk eyes identical but different from the vertebrates? Here to the left, I have found a picture of various different mollusk eyes of different complexity. Yeah, we can go back to that if you want to, but the main part of that is that all of them has this structure with the retina on top of the nerve cells, regardless of what the structure is otherwise. In arthropods, which are insects and spiders and their relatives, there are also various homologous structures in the eyes, but they are completely different from the vertebrates and the squids. The spider eye is not a compound eye like in the insects, but still they have the same basic structure as a compound eye in an insect. Also, exactly what you would expect from evolution. Yeah, I go through that. This is just to illustrate a question that I wanted you to reflect upon. The hummingbird. This is a picture of the smallest hummingbird and one of the largest dragonflies, and they are actually to scale. They are approximately the same size, and so their eyes are the same size. They are both flying. They both need to see in order to navigate when they are flying. But of course, the hummingbird has a vertebrate eye, and the dragonfly has a compound eye. But and under evolution, it couldn't be any different. It had to be like that. If we found a hummingbird with a compound eye, that evolution would fall apart. It would be impossible to explain. But as I see it, why should that be so? Why haven't a creator decided to give the hummingbird a compound eye if it works so well for the dragonfly? Or vice versa, why hasn't the dragonfly got a camera eye like the hummingbird if it works so well for a flying animal? I don't think it's obvious that it should be like that if creation is true. But of course, it's obvious that this is what we would expect if evolution is true. The same is true for various other homologous and non-homologous structures, like the legs of these different animals. They are performing the same function for walking, but they are completely different structures. While in the arthropods, you have different animals, so the crab and the spider and an insect, and even a horseshoe crab, these strange-looking creatures, and the basic structure of their legs is the same. And these animals are actually living in very, very different environments. Some of them are flying, some of them are living in the bottom of the water, and some of them are crawling around in the vegetation, and all kinds of different lives or environments. And still, the structure of their legs is more or less the same. Again, exactly what you would expect from evolution. They have the same, a common ancestor with this general structure of legs, which has been preserved through evolution. There is term called vestigial structures, and there is some confusion about what it actually means. It does not mean that we have a structure without any function. It just means small and imperfectly developed. This is from the Dictionary of Biological Terms. Small and imperfectly developed, not necessarily without function. It can have a function and still be vestigial. I have inserted two pictures of hind legs from whales. Basilosaurus is a fossil, a very, very common fossil. It is known from, I think, dozens or even hundreds of specimens. So it is a very, very well-known, well-described species. And it clearly has all the bones for a hind leg of a vertebrate, exactly what you would expect. The other one is from a modern whale, where you can see it very, very reduced, and you can hardly even imagine what bone is homologous to which in the Basilosaurus. But still, it is positioned in the right place in the organism, in the body of the whale, and it has actually some of the same functions, because some of the muscles, as you have pointed out yourself in some of your videos, some of the muscles in the whale, which is connected to these bones, has a function in reproduction. And in other vertebrates, there is also muscles connected to the same bones, which has more or less the same function. Also, when you look at various structures over time in fossils, sometimes you can follow the reduction of these structures. The Amblicitus, the structure or the leg, fossil leg to the left, and the Basilosaurus are both extinct species of whale, and you can see that it is more or less the same structure, but in the Basilosaurus it's much more reduced. To the right, I have a picture that shows that some of the details of the leg bones of fossil whales actually are very, very much like the same details in the so-called even-toed ungulates. In this case, it's a pronghorn. I don't know why they have chosen that, but that's just one species of the many more than 100 even-toed ungulates living today. And they all have this very special structure in their leg bones, which is only present in the ungulates and in extinct fossil whales, which is an indication, the first indication that we got that whales actually are closely related to ungulates, which is quite surprising, but that's the way it is. And this is actually supported again by the mitochondrial genome. High homology, of course, within the whales, especially within the baleen whales, but also with toothed whales. And the next group with high homology to the whales is the hippopotamus, it's called the Cetatiodactyla. Very, very strange name, but that's a group that is both the whales and the even-toed ungulates. And the hippopotamus is an even-toed ungulate, just like cattle and pigs and sheep, antelopes. And you can see that the homology in the mitochondrial genome is actually higher when you compare those species with the whales than if you compare any other mammal species. Also, telling the story that once in the past, the even-toed ungulates and the modern whales had common ancestor. That was more or less it for opening remarks. So I will go back to this one, I think. I hope so. Or do I have to stop the sharing?
I don't know.
No.
Stop sharing.
Yeah, stop sharing. Yeah. Okay. So I just open it later if we need it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, how do I call mine up? Now, you would think because of the similarities in all these computers, they would be evolving.
They are. They're getting faster and faster.
with some intelligent design, I think. Okay, share. There you go. Okay.
In that case, we agree.
All right. One of the evidences always given for evolution is what you spent the last, 25 minutes on, is homology, that because things are similar, therefore they must be related. And the more similar they are, the more closely related they are. Just on its face, if you step back 5 feet and look at that argument, anyone with half a brain and one eye would see how silly that is, because similarity could just as easily be argued for a common designer. I think we can analyze all the music ever written by Bach or Chopin or Mozart and find similarities in all of their scores that they wrote, or their musicals or whatever. And that does not prove that they are evolving. It proves that they are coming from the mind of the same individual. The same would be true of all of the books that an author writes, like Louis L'Amour, the famous Western writer here in America. His books, and I read probably 120 of them, I don't know what, but they have thousands and thousands of similarities. Proof it's coming from the same mind. So the big first thing I would get across is that, yes, I agree, there are similarities in all these animals, and similarities in the eye structure, and similarities in thousands of ways, but that has nothing to do with proving a common ancestor, and everything to do with indicating the same person designed them, and that would be God. So homologous structures are not evidence on their face for evolution. They're evidence for common designer. Now, you are correct. All of the textbooks use this argument that because these bones are similar in the animals, we have 2 bones in our wrist, the radius and the ulna. Hang on, let me write the time down here. The bat has 2 bones in his wrist, if you call it a wrist, the radius and the ulna. I would agree. There are similar structures in all the vertebrate animals for sure, and even I think maybe that's where it stops at the vertebrate animals. But all of the textbooks use this as evidence for evolution. And if you just again step back 5 feet and look at it, that is just as silly. It is evidence of a common designer. I think you notice nearly all of the cars on the road in Europe, and all the cars on the road in Asia, and the cars on the road in America, as a general rule, have 4 tires touching the ground. Well, that's proof they all evolved from butterflies. No, it's a design that works. It's a necessary design to have 4 tires touching the ground for stability and for ride comfort, etc. Why don't you have 20 tires touching the ground on your car? Well, because it's unnecessary. It wears out the rubber too fast, and too much friction with the road, etc. So I think a God who would design things would design each of the animals so that their forelimb can be rotated and twisted. To invent a machine that can do what the human arm can do would cost millions of dollars, maybe even could not be done. When you consider the human arm not only is able to do all these various motions, it is also able to heal itself. I don't know if anybody's made a machine can do that yet. If it gets an injury, it heals itself. All the machines I've ever had, I had to go fix them someplace, take it to a mechanic and get it fixed. So I agree there are similar structures. I don't think anybody's arguing that. The question is, what does it prove? In your mind, Stefan, and in the mind of evolutionists, this is evidence for evolution. Like this biology textbook says, other evidence for evolution. And then this is what you have. You've accumulated a whole bunch of bits of information that you think are evidence for evolution. Each one can be independently destroyed in a common sense argument, but somehow, because there's an accumulation of all these bits of false information, it looks like there's an overwhelming pattern of evolution. This essential biology book back from 2004 is Homologous Structures, Anatomical Signs of Descent with Modification. I would point out, first of all, why are they saying it has to modify through descent? We never see this. It's never observed. Cows produce cows, cats produce cats, humans produce humans, and they have the same bone structure without exception. I'd be willing to bet if we went back and dug up the grave of your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, he would have 2 bones in his wrist, just like you do. There has been no modification. You still have 2 bones in your wrist, and probably your great-great-great-great-grandchildren will have 2 bones in their wrist. Evolution is never observed. It is only imagined. It only takes place in the mind of those who want to believe this. We see 2 bones in the wrist of the humans, of every human being alive, if assuming they're born, other than some catastrophe or genetic defect. So, yes, I agree. We're looking at the same evidence, Stefan. We're both seeing the similar structures in these animals. I agree. Hold on. However, we're coming to very different conclusions. I would point out that thousands of parts on a Honda Civic will fit on a Honda Prelude. Thousands of parts, interchangeable parts. Well, that's design efficiency. Probably the lug nuts would interchange. Okay, that's proof they're coming from the same designer, not proof of evolution. This textbook says the commonality, or comparative anatomy here, provides further evidence of evolution. The commonality suggests that these and other vertebrate animals are all related. They probably evolved from a common ancestor. That's what the books are constantly teaching the kids, and obviously that's what you were taught going through school growing up, and you believed it. I think it's just common sense to say, look at this. First of all, this structure is amazingly complex. Each one of these bones, whether it be the tibia, the fibula, the patella, the radius, the ulna, the humerus, whatever, each bone is phenomenal. It's able to grow and function while it is changing size. It functions when you're a child, and it functions when you're an adult, and every stage in between. So you have all this bone structure that is able to work while it is changing. This is evidence of an amazingly intelligent designer. I look at just one single bone in your arm and say, wow, thank you, God, you're so smart. The bone is both strong, slightly flexible, and lightweight. And the harder you work the muscles, the more the bone will grow in response to that. You have a bone that's able to sense a need for more density based on the more work you do. That's why a bodybuilder will not only get bigger muscles, but bigger bones. So we look at these bones in these animals, and I see amazing design. What a great God we serve. And you see a common ancestor, which ultimately goes back to dirt, which goes back to nothing. I don't understand how you can see that. This textbook says, commonalities suggest that these and other vertebrate animals are all related. They probably evolved from a common ancestor. That is complete propaganda. That is silly. That is a lie. It could prove a common designer. All the bones, by the way, that from these different animals, whether they're for swimming or flying or digging or running or grasping, if you really get into the DNA analysis of this and the gene code, you'll find they develop from different genes in different organisms. I've never heard an evolutionist explain why the similar bones in a bat, compared to a human, for instance, why is this bone developing based on the genetic code of very different genes? Okay, this Irish textbook shows comparative anatomy of the different animals. It says, look at that, we've all got fingers and wrist bones and arms. I agree. And that's used, it's used all over the world. I have textbooks from a lot of different countries. Here's one from Latvia showing the same thing. Here's one from just a few weeks ago. Someone sent me a 2015 textbook showing again the similar structures, and I don't argue with that. I agree. But what does it show? It proves a similar designer. Lug nuts from a Pontiac will fit on a Chevy. That's because they both evolved from a skateboard 4.792 million years ago. And you can go to the junkyard and dig up fossilized Chevys and find out the lug nuts probably still fit on a modern Chevy. That's not evolution. That's common design. So we both are observing similar forelimb structure. We're both observing the homology. It's a good observation. But to conclude they had a common ancestor is a bad conclusion. And to say this all helps prove we came from a rock for no reason with no help is a really bad conclusion. I could point out that I quickly wrote down a sentence. The sentence in English, Please bring me a bat. I can change one letter. Please bring me a cat. I have completely changed the meaning. Please bring me a car, changing one more letter. We could play around and develop thousands of sequences like this where one tiny letter change in a very complex sentence can make a completely different meaning to it. Well, that's how all languages work. That's how your language would work there in Denmark. You can change one letter and have a vastly different meaning to the word. So changing one little gene on a chromosome might make some vast difference in the outcome of the creature, the animal, the anatomy. That, again, is evidence of intelligence. I don't understand how anybody can see anything other than intelligent design. Why would they even dream? It shows we're related. And you mentioned, no, you didn't mention the development argument, but you mentioned evidence. Oh, I think we need to go back and define. You showed pictures of a wolf and a dog and the similar gene structure. Again, I would point out that's correct. They probably have similar genes because they have similar functions to serve in life. I think you would find Microsoft PowerPoint, which I use all the time, has probably millions of lines of code. Microsoft Word, to do documents and letters and writing, has also millions of lines of code. And if we laid them side by side, I think somebody with the time and energy and a government grant to do it could find many tens of thousands of identical lines of code. You could probably go through Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint and determine that they have a certain percentage of similarity. Let's say it's 95%, okay, to pick a number. Okay, I agree. What would that demonstrate, though? If you find similarities in Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word, and I assure you you would find millions of identical lines of code, would that then prove that they're all related to Morse code and that they evolved by chance, or that it's a common design? When I click spell check in PowerPoint, it probably takes me to the exact same place that spell check in Microsoft Word takes me, or any other Microsoft program. So the fact that there are similarities is not evidence for evolution. And an honest science researcher should tell their students and anyone listening to them, hey, boys and girls, hey, men and women, we have similar structures between the wolf and the dog. I agree. There are 170 differences that we've discovered so far in the place settings of the genes. Okay, let's assume that's true. I would say I agree. Then an honest researcher would say there are two possible ways to look at this: common ancestor or common designer. But the evolutionist is not being honest with their students. They're only telling them you must look at this as evidence of a common ancestor, when it is not. It's evidence of a common designer. Let's see, I wanted to get to one more thing. You mentioned about the wolf, the fox, the D-hole having a different 2,400 different positions. Again, they have similar functions to serve in life. They have two eyes on their head so they can have binocular vision. That is a common, hang on. It's very common for creatures to have. Did I get it right, Steve? To go to the eye. I don't have my mouse here. I don't have. Oh, you got it. Okay. The whale. Okay, the whale evolution right there. Okay. Does it brings me up to the right PowerPoint? No, I guess not. Okay. We have moved it here. I'll get to it. The fact that there are similar needs, I think many cars, whether they're made the Lada in Russia or the Volvo or the Honda, they probably all have a spare tire and a jack because they need that. Things go wrong, things break, and so they have similarities because of common problems they face in driving down the road. You're likely to get these same problems. And so if you watch my video number 4, Lies in the Textbooks, I go through all of this on different, explaining all the evolution evidences that are much better explained as a common, here we go. I want that one, 698, let's see, Alt-DV, 698, enter. Okay, now I need to go off screen, or is that okay like that? Hit escape? Okay, and then enter, there. Okay. You mentioned about the whales and the pelvic bones. Let me just explain to the listeners what this is about. This textbook shares what I would call the propaganda Just imagine whales walking around. It's true. Here's the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History, has a skeleton of a whale. And it shows these bones you're referring to down here in the abdomen area. Here they are, another view inside that circle. And they call it the whale's pelvis. And say this is evidence that the whale used to walk on land. Wow, just imagine the whale walking on land with those little tiny bones. Actually, these bones are used in all whales that I'm aware of have something similar to this, and they're used in reproduction. The whale has to mate underwater in the dark with no arms, and he can't talk and say, "Scoot over, honey." They have a penis 15 feet long. They have to maneuver in the dark. So both male and female whales have ways of maneuvering their sex organs because they don't have any hands. Because this is a way to get baby whales. So if you want to believe that this is evidence that it used to have a leg, you're welcome to believe that, but that's not really science. That's a religious belief. All we see is whales, every time they're born and grow up, have the exact same bones. That's all they have. All the ancestor whales had this, and the modern whales have it. I'd be real cautious, though. I'd advise you, Stefan, to be cautious about using any fossils as evidence for anything. Because I've said many times, when you find fossils in the ground, like a fossil whale, really all you know is it died. You could not prove that that particular one had any children. You certainly couldn't prove it had different children. And why would anybody think bones in the dirt were capable of doing something that no whale today can do, which is produce something other than its kind? That's why evolution only takes place in the imagination. It doesn't happen in real life. We never see it. And science deals with things we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. Evolution is not science. It's completely religious. Here's National Geographic. It says millions of years ago, dolphins had legs, showing the same hind legs. They've got the picture right here. This is propaganda. This is a lie. Those bones in the dolphin are used exactly like the whale. They're used for reproduction. They're not leftover hind legs. Someone can believe that if they want. It says, this textbook, this guy's very stupid about his whale anatomy. He said the whale's pelvis is located far from the vertebra and has no apparent function. He needs to go back. Whoever wrote that book needs to quit writing books on biology and go back to school. We've got one of the whale bones in our museum. That's one right there. It has a generous blood supply. It is a very active bone. I'm sure as active as the whale can get it. He'd love to use it more, probably. So it is part of their reproductive system. Has nothing whatsoever to do with walking on land. That is propaganda. But it's used all over the world. Here's one from just a few months ago. Still being used as evidence for evolution. Said it's evidence of evolution from four-legged land-dwelling mammals. A couple of thoughts I'd like to make, and then you can go on to your points here, Stefan. One, we don't see any animals produce anything other than their kind. We never see this. Two, these whale bones are used right now today, and they're always the same. Three, fossils do not prove anything. You can't prove it had any children. And, oh, I'm sorry, I had to cough here. Secondly, this example from the whale is a classic example. Even if it were true, it's an example of losing something, not gaining something. You're saying the animals lost their legs, and that is evidence of improvement? Show me an example of a creature that is gaining something. To go from legs to no legs is a loss of information. Now, it didn't happen. They didn't go from legs to no legs, but even if it were true, that again is the exact opposite of evolution. The bones in the whale are used. They have, like I said, a blood supply, nerve supply. They're used, and they used all the time. They are not evidence for evolution. Finding Ambulocetus or one of these creatures that are mostly imagination is evidence that something died. That's all it is. In a real honest court of law, it would never be used as evidence of anything. Of anything changing into a different kind of animal. So if you find fossils in the dirt, really all you can demonstrate is it died. It is not evidence of any evolution at all, unless you want to believe that. And I wish you evolutionists would be honest and say, students, this is what we believe, capital B, believe. This is our religion. You need to start a church, the Church of the Evolutionist, and quit using tax dollars to spread this propaganda as if it is part of science. Like this one from Berkeley University, this couple months ago. Hippos likely evolved from a group of these creatures 15 million years ago. That's silly. Hippos are still producing hippos. Whales are still producing whales. You don't have any evidence for evolution. None. You can believe that if you want, but I'm sorry, it's not science. Okay. You left several. I didn't get time to cover several things. I'll get it during rebuttal here. Go ahead, Stefan. Your turn.
Okay. I just open my. I hope I can do that. No, you have to close your screen share first. So like that. Yes. Okay. We just happen to have the same the same picture. Well, here is this Ampelocetus you mentioned. I found a picture of a much more complete. Well, the argument in evolution is always the argument of patterns. Single observations is not evidence of evolution, or very rarely, but patterns are evidence. And the pattern here is quite clear. I just show you. Well, first we have the hind legs here of Ampelocetus and other fossils, and of the Basilosaurus we have the hind leg here, which is much more reduced, but still with more bones than in the modern whales. And at the same time, in the same fossils, in the same found in the same layers, we have the little red dots. You have to look at the right part of the slide. We have 4 different whale ancestors, and what we can see is the little red dot is the nostrils, and you can see that from Pakicetus to Rhodocetus to Dorodon to modern whale, the nostril is moving backwards, one little step at a time, and at the same time, in the same fossils found in the same layers are the reduction of the hind legs. And at the same time, in the skulls, you can see that the structures in the inner ear is adjusting to life in water. So it's not just a few singularly observations, it's patterns of observations. A lot of different kinds of changes from one fossil to the next points in the same direction, that this is actually ancestors of whales slowly adjusting to the life in water by moving the nostrils from over the time, moving backwards and up on the top of the head, and at the same time the hind legs reducing in size. Now, what you didn't talk about, you talked a lot about these vertebrate legs, but what you didn't talk about was my actual point that I just see if I can find it again. Where do we have it here? That the wave flipper, though the function and the overall look of it is much more like that of a shark fin than like that of a human arm, but still the skeleton is vice versa, very much like a human arm and nothing like the shark fin. Now, according to your point of view, the shark and the whale has the same creator. They have a common creator. Why on earth would this common creator, this creator that created both the wave flipper and a more or less identical structure in the shark, why would it give them completely different skeleton structures? And why would he choose a skeleton structure that so clearly indicates that this creature is related to land mammals? In all respects, the whale is a mammal. I hope we agree on that. And also parts of the skeleton that has close resemblance to the rest of the mammal's skeletons, though the actual function of the limb is much more like that of a shark fin. That was my question. The pattern is the question, not the individual observations, but the pattern of observation is the question. Then you use parts of cars and parts of computer language and things like that as examples of identical units fitting different programs or different cars. Exactly, that is exactly my point, Mr. Hovind. You have identical units. In nature, you never see identical units in very different organisms. The dog wing is not identical to the human arm, and the mitochondrial genome of the whale is not identical to other whales. To come here, I think the wolf is better. Get up here. Yeah, it is. The mitochondrial genes of the wolf is not identical to the fox. They serve exactly the same functions. It is not identical to the mitochondrial genome of the domesticated cat, but they serve exactly the same function. Why are they different? Why are they not just exactly the same? All mammals, most animals actually has exactly the same 13 protein coding genes in their mitochondrial genome. Exactly the same. They serve exactly the same function, but you can trace the homology exactly the way that evolution would predict. It's a pattern that is important here. They are not identical, they are more or less homologous, and the more or less follows exactly what you would expect when you look at the anatomy. But the important thing here is that the mitochondrial genes has nothing to do with anatomy. They serve completely different functions and exactly the same function all over the place. So why this pattern? That's what I'm asking you. Why is there this pattern? In human design, you don't find a pattern of something that is more or less the same. You find patterns of something that is completely identical or quite different. My computer mouse and the front light of my bicycle uses exactly the same kind of battery. Not more or less the same kind of battery, but exactly the same kind of battery. You can take the battery out of the front light and put it into the computer mouse, and it works perfectly. You see never something like that in living organisms. You can make it work if you take a gene from one to another. Yes, it works, but they are not naturally the same. They are always slightly different, always following the pattern that more or less corresponds to the pattern of anatomical differences. So it's a very different kind of pattern in living organisms and in human design. Then you say kind produce kind. Dogs always produce dogs. Yes, but no one. You cannot find any biologist in the world that would say that you should expect, under evolution, you should expect differences to accumulate in a pace where you can actually see it. But well, this is millions of years question that we strongly disagree on. We can talk about it in more detail if you want. But time is a very great issue here, as you know. If you have a million generations, then very, very slight differences from generation to generation can accumulate into organisms that is completely different. The language analogy is actually Well, that's actually interesting because the language analogy, you change one word and then you get something else, and then you change another word and you get something else. Well, if that can happen in language, then why would you say that it could never happen in genes? Why couldn't genes, by changing small parts now and then and here and there, and keep changing and changing and changing, if language can lead to something completely different, then why shouldn't genetics be able to lead to something completely different by slowly changing? But well, I don't think. I actually think that the language analogy is pretty good analogy of evolution. Not very good, but pretty good. There is no accurate analogy of anything here in the world. Analogy has always its backwards. What was it more? Yeah, well, I don't know if I forgot something, but I would like to make a little provocative thing here, if you will allow me. I just have to find it. Just a second. Again, on the pattern of homology. I guess you know it, but here it comes anyway. This is again on the mitochondrial genome. Genus Pan has two species, chimps and bonobos. They are almost identical in the mitochondrial genome. If you compare chimp mitochondrial genome with all other mammal mitochondrial genomes, well, as far as I know, I have actually done quite a lot of work on this, and I have compared chimp with, I think, 100 different mammals, and the one that comes out with the highest homology, guess what? It's humans. 91% homologous. Orangutan is somewhat lower. Gorilla is in between. And then comes another monkey, and then comes other placentals, and then other mammals, and then, of course, other vertebrates, non-mammal vertebrates here, the chicken. But the important part here is that either I'm not sure what your view on the created kinds are, but other creationists claim that the chimp and the gorilla and the orangutan is the same kind, the same created kind, and actually has a common ancestor not so long ago. But that would be completely inexplicable by the human interfering with this. But I don't know your view on beautiful kinds. So it might be that you think that this is no problem because orangutan is a different kind from the chimp. I don't know, but still, why this pattern? Why? We have exactly the same genes. We have exactly the same function of the genes. They are not identical, but they are homologous, and the homology shows exactly the pattern that will be expected if you look at the anatomy of the animals. What is the idea of this? Why do we find this? I simply don't understand how creationists can explain this. The only person I have come across that has tried to explain this kind of pattern is the person I mentioned, Nathaniel Jensen from Answers in Genesis, and his explanation is, well, silly. It's simply stupid, because what he claims is that all these mitochondrial genes has multiple functions, and I don't think that he has thought about this explanation, because it actually would mean that every single one of the 13 genes should have hundreds of different functions. Some of the functions in mammals, and some of the functions in insects, and other functions in unicellular organisms or in plants or in fungi or whatever. It's remarkable that a scientist can come up with such a stupid idea. But I would urge you to give some comments on the pattern here. It's not just homology, it's a pattern of homology. It's not random homology, it's a pattern. Very, very strong pattern. And the pattern is exactly the one that you would expect if you look at the anatomy. The placentals has a somewhat different reproductive system from the marsupials here, the kangaroo, and all the placentals are more homologous in the mitochondrial genome than any of them are with the kangaroo. All mammals more homologous than any of them are to any of the birds. All birds more homologous than any bird is to any fish or whatever. Why this pattern? That would be my main question to you. And then again, give some comments on this shark, whale, human arm system too. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, am I on, Steve? How do I? Hey, Steve. I think I have to screen share or something here.
I have closed this.
My mouse is not working. Yeah, hold on 1 second here. We're waiting for it to evolve. Give us about 14.6 million years, and we should be fine. There. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, and this computer technology and Skype and all the satellites is primitive compared to one DNA. Okay, share. You want that one?
More or less true.
Hang on, my techno guy is trying to figure it out here. There we go. Oh, that one. Okay. Now for me to screen, just to talk. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Stefan. I think you've clearly demonstrated that it's a religion. You said no evolutionist would say that we see things happening, changing, because it takes millions of years. That is exactly my point. It's outside of science. It's not observable science. It's something you believe in, but nobody sees this happen. Nobody. The octopus eye. Let's see. I'll find it here. I can multitask here. Okay, let me find. You said there's a pattern. The pattern is just as explainable with a common designer. Example, the Honda car, or let's take the Chevy car, has 5 lug nuts that are a certain size. But when you go to the Chevy truck, now all of a sudden you have 8 lug nuts that are bigger. So they're not identical. So because they're not identical, but they serve a common function of holding the tire on, and there's more of them and they're stronger, that in your mind is evidence of evolution. When actually, that's evidence again of the common designer. So it looks like you want it both ways. If things are identical, that's evidence for evolution. If they're not quite identical, that's still evidence for evolution. Okay, well, the Chevy truck and the Chevy car do not have identical. No, I want the octopus eye. Well, yeah, that'll do. Okay, right there. Yep. Let's see. That'll go here. The human eye. Okay, 23. Got it. Okay, right there. Charles Darwin was very confused by the eye, like as he should have been. Screen share. Okay. Because any eye, you brought out the vertebrate eye, the eye of the insect being a compound eye. Anyone who studies biology or anatomy will know any eye of any kind is beyond belief in its complexity. The retina of the human eye is about a square inch, but it contains 137 million light-sensitive cells, all connected to the brain. And you mentioned the fact that we have the one evolutionist I debated, and you brought up a similar concept here, is that the human eye is poorly designed. Hang on, time down here. Because the blood vessels are in front of the retina in the human. And the octopus or the squid or animals that live underwater, the argument is they have a better eye because the blood vessels are behind the retina. Well, this is ludicrous. The blood vessel's position in front of the retina or behind the retina is dependent on the designer designing it that way for whatever its environment is. Octopus live underwater, and the water filters out most of the UV light coming in, so they don't need the blood vessels in front. We live in the air, and air is not a good filter for UV light, and so the blood vessels is the body's last defense against burning the light-sensitive cells. So it's again further evidence for design. If you want to swap eyes with a squid or an octopus, you go ahead, but you'll be blind in a few weeks from the UV light. So the design of the squid's eye and the design of the human eye are mind-boggling. If you could get a computer that would do or get a camera that would do what the eye does, you'd be wealthy. 137 million light-sensitive photoreceptors in 1 square inch. I don't know what pixelization is down to now. Steve might know. They've got some pretty high-resolution cameras, but nothing even close to the human eye. Nowhere close. And this is very intelligent people working with very expensive equipment, trying to produce something to mimic what God did when he created it. To say that any eye of any animal or insect or vertebrate or non-vertebrate evolved is ludicrous. It's not science, that's for sure. Okay, you asked me several specific questions. The whale flipper and the shark fin serve a similar function. I agree. Huh? 10,000 per square inch is the most we have now for pixelization for cameras. Okay. And the human eye has 137 million. I don't think they're going to get close. Now we're close. Okay. So, and this is with intelligent people trying to make it happen. You think it happened by chance that we got 137 million. I admire your faith, Stefan. I do not admire your science or your conclusions. Okay. Sharks and whales have flippers and serve a similar function, but different design because they both live in the water. I think a diesel engine and a gas engine serve a similar function. They both propel a motion of some kind, but they're very different in their design. A rotary engine in the Mazda RX-3, 4, and 6, and 7, or whatever, 8, 9, I don't know how high they are now, but the rotary engine is phenomenal. I've had a couple of them, and they are amazing to drive, but they are completely different than a piston engine or a jet engine, and yet they serve a similar function. Is that evidence of evolution or evidence of some intelligent designers? They have rear engine drive cars and front engine drive cars and midship engine drive cars. They're all trying to accomplish the same goal. So the shark has to swim in the water and the whale has to swim in the water. So God designed them very differently. I would agree that by our modern classification system, a whale is considered a mammal. That does not mean that's how God classifies them. I think most 5-year-olds would say if it swims in the water, it's in the fish family. They have to be taught that it's not a fish, that it's actually a whale, and I'm perfectly fine with that. It has hair, gives milk, bears live young. I'm familiar with the mammal classification system that Carolus Linnaeus came up with. But the Bible says the whale, Jonah was swallowed by a whale. In another case, it says he was swallowed by a fish. So apparently in the biblical classification, a whale is in the fish category, which is perfectly reasonable. It does not mean it's wrong. It means our classification system is different. You probably have different words in your language than I have in my language for certain things. Probably just about everything. So the pattern of evidence is that the whale and the shark both have a common designer. That's the evidence. That's how I see the evidence. You showed the fossils of the red dot moving, the nostrils moving. I'm sure you're aware, Stefan, if you studied this, that it's a whole lot more. See, the whale with the nostrils on top of his head, you have to disconnect the trachea and hook it up differently. How's it going to survive? Well, all of a sudden, see, the animals like whales can breathe through their nose, which is not go through their throat, because it goes straight to their lungs, because they've got their mouth open, swallowing water at the same time to separate the krill or whatever their diet's going to be. So you not only have to just move the bone in the skull, you have to completely disconnect the soft tissue and reconnect it some other way, so it's redirected. This is absolutely impossible, even to dream up an idea how it might happen. The airway is different. I've never heard an evolutionist answer that one. It's not just a matter of moving a red dot on your picture. And plus, again, you go back to the evidence from fossils with the red dot in a different picture. You can't prove any of those are related to each other. So you found an animal with nostrils on the front. You found another one with nostrils a couple inches higher. Okay, that is not evidence in any honest court of law that there's any connection between the two at all. You could get buried on top of a hamster when you die, and that does not prove you're related to the hamster. Order of burial in the dirt does not prove anything. Moving dots on your picture does not prove anything. Let's see. I think I've covered most of your questions. Oh, apes and chimps. I don't know if they're the same kind or not. The Bible says the animals will bring forth after their kind. That word baraminology in the Hebrew is being studied, and the current estimate, the last I heard, was there are 8,000 kinds of animals that would have to be on Noah's Ark. Kinds, not species. There are 1,100 recognized species of bats in the world. They might have had a common ancestor, a bat. There are 8 different varieties of bears in the world: the brown bear, black bear, panda bear, grizzly bear, etc., polar bear. They might have had a common ancestor, I don't know. Noah might have had 2 pairs of bears on the ark that were different, and they now have 8 different varieties. He might have had 2 different kinds of bats on the ark. I don't know. I don't know where the kind is exactly, but I'm not asking all the taxpayers to pay for my religion to be taught in the school system. You are not only asking, but demanding. The evolutionists are demanding that their religion be taught at taxpayer expense, or they come take away your property if you don't pay your real estate tax, which is what pays school taxes over here. So I think that whether apes and chimps are identical, I would doubt it. I think Noah probably had 2 chimps and 2 apes and 2 humans. Well, 8 humans. And I don't know if where the other ape-like creatures fit into the category. But to start with, say, 6 or 8 or 10 reproducing pairs in this family of what we consider the apes as a general category, and to develop all the varieties we have today, that is certainly feasible. But you guys want us to take this evidence and believe these apes and humans came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago. That is extremely silly. It is not science. I do admire your faith. I do not admire your science. Stefan, that's your religion, and I wish you guys would just admit it. Nobody's ever seen an ape or a chimp or a human produce anything other than their kind. You believe it happened, you dream it happened, and you dig up a bone and say, aha, this is evidence. None of those bones count in an honest court of law, and anybody that's honest would recognize that. No fossils count. So I think I've covered your questions. If I missed one, bring it up again. Your turn, Stefan.
Okay. You have to close the share screen. Hello?
Yeah, let's just go a few more minutes. I've got a couple other things. I got to do something here?
Yeah, you have to close the share.
Stop sharing. Okay. Which mouse? This mouse. Okay. Stop sharing. Yeah, you go ahead and give some closing, and I'll give a closing, and then let's...
Okay. The eyes of vertebrates and squids. Well, I remind you, Mr. Hovind, that fish live in the water. They are vertebrates. They have vertebrate eyes with the wiring on top of the retina, just like you would expect vertebrates to have under evolution. So your explanation, and on top of that, some snails are living on land, but they have the retina and nerve cells in the same direction as the octopus. So your explanation of protecting against UV light is, yeah, I cannot put that in a polite way. It is silly, Mr. Hovind. It doesn't fit the facts. Then you said that I'm not doing science. Well, we have I have to talk a little bit about what science is then. Science is about testing theories. That's what science is all about. You have a theory, you make predictions. If the predictions are met, you are happy. If the predictions are not met, you are also happy, but you have to make up another theory, or at least adjust the theory. The theory of evolution says that you would expect to find fossils in the soil, and those fossils should look as transitional forms leading to the forms that live today. And that is what the whale fossils does. They look exactly what you would expect. They have the nostrils on the right places. They have the reduction of the hind legs, they have the adjustment of the inner ear to hearing underwater, and so on and so forth. They are exactly what you would expect if evolution is true. And that is the way science works. You don't have to make observations of everything. How should I put it? Newton knew that, and Galilei knew that Earth was orbiting the Sun. But nobody has ever seen Earth orbiting the Sun. Nobody has seen it. And still, we have known that for more than 300 years. You don't have to make direct observations in order to do science. That was that. And still, I simply don't think that you are relating to this pattern thing. I have shown you these very, very detailed list of homology that exactly matches what you would expect. And remember, this is the way science works. You have a theory, evolution. It says, well, okay, the genetics, if all these animals has a common descent, and they have common ancestors, and some has a close common ancestor not so long ago, and some has an ancestor longer ago, and some has a common ancestor very, very long ago. What would you expect? You would expect anatomy to reflect the distance to the common ancestor. Very close, very homologous anatomy if you have a common ancestor not so long ago, and very different anatomy if you have a common ancestor a long time ago. And you would expect the genetics to reflect this, the same pattern. So you would expect anatomy and genetics to reflect the same pattern. And that is exactly, not just more or less, it is exactly what we see. Exactly. And this is the way science works. You have a theory, you make predictions, you go out and make observations and see if your predictions are met. And if your predictions are met, as they are in this case, your theory gets confirmed. Not proved, but confirmed. And when you have made predictions in many different directions, here it is genetics, and we have talked about fossils, and we have talked about anatomy, and we can talk about biogeography if you want. We don't have time, but we could. And if you make all these different predictions based on the same theory, and you go out and look, and every single time you see exactly what you expect, then you are making science, and you are actually confirming your theory. And you are not making up dreams or hopes or faith or anything else. You are actually making science, even if you cannot see things working in real time. I don't. Do we have much more time, or did we? I don't remember how long time we agreed to go on. Did we say something like 1.5 hours, Mr. Hovind?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's been 1.5 hours. Is that your closing? I can give a closing and we can quit.
Yeah, I think that was my closing then.
Okay.
Yeah, I just stopped the sharing here so that you can take over the picture.
Hold mine up, Steve. No. Okay. Well, thank you, Stefan, for doing this. It's obvious you really sincerely believe this. There may be a couple of reasons for that. Let's see. How do I? There. Get my screen share. Look at that. See? You would think this would all just happen just automatically, evolution. Okay. A couple of quick thoughts in closing. Fossils, and they're found all over the world, including the top of Mount Everest, are evidence of a flood. These animals drowned. In nearly every case, they drowned or suffocated or were buried in sediment so rapidly that they effectively drowned. or suffocated or buried, compacted in the mud. So the Bible says in 2 Peter chapter 3 that the scoffers would come in the last days that would be willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood. And I'm going to have to put you in that category, Stefan. I think you don't want to see that there was a flood that formed all of these fossils all at the same time. And flood would automatically sort them based on body density, based on habitat, based on intelligence. Any sorting in the so-called fossil record is best explained by a flood. We are a copy. It's obvious that you want to believe in evolution, and there may be reasons why. I don't know you at all, but I have in front of me a picture, a copy I made of Charles Darwin's book, page 217, about his confusion about the human eye. This was the first generation copy. I then took the copy and laid that on the copy machine and copied it again. And then I took the copy of the copy and laid it on the copy machine. I kept copying. Instead of off the original, I copied off the copy. There's the 5th generation. You can see the letters start to fade. There's the 10th generation. Much of it is now unreadable. There's the 15th generation. Very little of it is readable. In 15 generations, we went from a text that everybody can read to just about unreadable. Had we kept going, it would have been just a blur of everything. Every animal alive today is a copy off of their parents' genetic code. In the copying process, I don't know of any examples where new information is added. There are scrambled examples of mutations.
I can show you if you want to.
Well, let's do that next time. We got to go here, but if you have 1 or 2 examples, you would need trillions of examples to turn a bacteria into a whale. Trillions and trillions and trillions. Maybe you have 1, I don't know, but I do know that 99.99999% of all observed mutations are detrimental. It's backwards. It's sliding downhill. Now, maybe some people want to believe this, but I want to leave you with this one thought, Stefan. You and I both are going to die one day. You're going to be dead for an extremely long time, so am I. Are you sure, absolutely 100% sure, positive, that you want to follow this path of thinking that you're on? Because you're trying to deny, certainly you're saying God, the Bible is wrong, because it does not teach anything like you're teaching. And you're welcome to believe the Bible's wrong. That's your privilege. But you realize if I am right, this is Pascal's wager coming now, if I am right, you are in serious trouble. If you are right, I have not lost a thing. I have lived a wonderful life. I enjoy my family. I enjoy life. And I have, even if it turns out there is no God, I still had a great life on this planet. If I'm right, whoa, then the best is yet to come. And you are in royal serious trouble. You just might want to think about that. In the book of Romans, chapter 1, it tells us that people do not want to believe in God, so God gives up on them, and he lets them believe crazy things. Read Romans 1 very slowly and carefully. 3 times it says God gives them up to believe something absolutely silly. And of course it leads into, normally, it says in Romans 1, homosexual behavior. That is what the Romans 1, so it starts with people not wanting God to run their life. So whether that's your case or not, I don't know, but you are going to be dead. I will see you Judgment Day, and I must tell you this. God loves you. He wants you to be saved. If you don't want that, then that's your business. But he does love you, and he wants you to get born again. But you have sinned. You're guilty. You've broken his laws. And you're going to face an angry God someday. I think your mic is still on over there, Stefan. Somebody's mic is. Okay. Okay. You're going to face a very angry God one day. And he's going to say the evidence was overwhelming, and you got millions of dollars worth of equipment. Judgment Day, and maybe I'll get over to Denmark, or you come over to Alabama. I'd be glad to take you to dinner, and we can talk about these things. But bottom line is, once we're dead, it's too late. So I would encourage you to really think hard. Are you sure you want to follow this path into the grave? Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.